Okay, awesome. Again, just a little bit of a breakdown for today. We've highlighted a couple of the key topics that have emerged over the past year. Definitely these subtopics here under remote teaching best practices are not the only ones that you've encountered, but they're themes that we've heard from across the faculty, from instructors, from student and instructor surveys as well, that we felt would be best addressed here. I will go through a couple of questions to consider, as well as a couple of tips for you to consider as well. And this is definitely looking at these topics from a more general lens and keeping in mind that you may have something that works for you already. So the very first topic we have here is on synchronous or asynchronous delivery. What should I do? What type of session would work best? What am I most comfortable with? Or what are students really wanting? And as with many of these topics, there is not a straight answer. One of the things that to keep in mind are the questions here as you're thinking about your course. Advantages and disadvantages. So absolutely, with synchronous and asynchronous, there are components to consider in terms of engagement, your bandwidth, I'll say again, what you've done before. Later on in the workshop, Zara, Elena, and Robin will share a little bit about their approaches to their courses with an asynchronous example, a synchronous example, and then a mix of the two. So a couple of questions to consider for synchronous. When remote teaching kind of all started last year, the suggestion was to really try asynchronous. So synchronous sessions were not really being promoted when the Keep Learning website, for example, was launched. And several factors reasoning for that is time zones being one, connectivity issues, students' schedules, and perhaps students' life at home doesn't always mesh well with perhaps the structure you've set out. On that same line, like same token, instructor schedules too may not always allow for synchronous sessions to be possible. So when looking at your course, would really encourage you to consider taking a look at your outline and determining where in my course do I really need a synchronous session? Is a learning activity something that students can do offline and complete just as well, or do they really have to see you and see their peers in real time? What is it you want to get out of your synchronous session? Are you wanting real-time answers from students? Are you wanting to give them an opportunity to get up and move around? These are just some questions to think about. If you are considering a synchronous session, I would suggest that you consider alternative pathways for completing the course if students aren't able to attend. So put yourself in the shoes of a student. If they're unable to join you for that lecture or for that check-in, what other resources might you prepare? Perhaps you and or your TAs prepare if something goes wrong. If something goes wrong and no one can attend your synchronous session, what alternatives would you consider? Oftentimes we think of synchronous and asynchronous as completely different types of delivery, and they are, but there are times when you can use a synchronous session that uses asynchronous strategies. And what I mean by this is perhaps you have a weekly student drop-in where you're answering student questions on an upcoming quiz. And perhaps in Learn, you create a discussion board where students asynchronously access the discussion board, post their questions, and that way you have a chance for students to participate before the synchronous session, even if they're unable to attend. I do want to give thanks to Daniel Opperwall from CEL, who shared a few of the questions to consider here as well. So if you are planning to offer a synchronous session, a couple of tips, best practices here for you to consider. The top being, well, try to avoid requiring and or grading synchronous participation. Again, in this climate, we don't know what students' lives look like. So to penalize them for not being able to participate would probably not mesh well with the student or with you, and you might have more concerns pop up throughout the term. Definitely do record all of your synchronous sessions if you're having them, and posting them in a timely manner. So if it is a lecture, if it's near one of the peak periods in the term, maybe a midterm's coming up, you'll want to make sure that the processing time between actually holding the lecture and students accessing it is kept short. So students aren't waiting a week, 2 weeks for that recording. The guidelines here also are borrowed from the remote teaching practices from health website. So suggesting no more than 1 hour per week, does not include office hours if you are to hold a synchronous session, only because we want to make sure that students who aren't able to attend, again, do have opportunities, and that the course isn't solely relied upon synchronous. You'll want to also make sure the timing of your synchronous sessions are consistent. We have read and heard throughout the past year that organization and course structure is really key to help students stay on task. They're juggling likely several courses, and so if you can do your best to organize your course in a way that helps a student with their time management, that is really highly recommended. And again, during your synchronous sessions, considering opportunities for students to engage. So something that you may have seen being used in a workshop, or perhaps you've used yourself, like a polling tool at the beginning of a lesson, where you want to ask students, what are your thoughts on the course reading this week? Or any kind of icebreaker that would be appropriate for your course as well. Again, mentioned before, provide alternatives and access to the same learning experience for students who cannot attend synchronous sessions. Okay, and then now for asynchronous delivery, course structure, again, using a very consistent course structure to help clarify your goals for the week. So we'll take a look at a couple examples later from the teaching fellows, but maybe posting a weekly video, or in your course outline, adding my asynchronous content will be posted by this time. Just students have a flag and they know when to look out for those postings. Another strategy I've seen a lot is using short video screencasts. So you may have a course where students in general are familiar with Learn, but yet they might not be familiar with the way that you set up your course. The way you set up your course could vary quite differently from another of their courses. So using a screencasting tool to say, here is where you can access discussions, or here is where I will be posting content, would be very, very useful. If you have a course where you're wanting students to experience a virtual field trip, for example, letting them know where they can find that information within Learn. Short intro video. Another tip I have is, if you are comfortable, is perhaps even posting an intro video. Maybe you want students to know like a little bit about you, if you're comfortable with that, or maybe a little bit about what you hope they will get out of the course. Recording video lectures in small segments of 5 to 15 minutes. So we've heard time and time again that students will not likely sit down for a 1 hour lecture. And that's not students alone. It's very hard to focus in front of the screen for an hour, listening to just lecture material. So do your best to maintain or to create lectures that are in chunks, keeping the video files to 500 MB or lower. And the last point here is a question I often get asked is like, well, I have a lot of content. How do I fit that all within these 5 to 15 minute chunks? And that really is tough, but it's a challenge for you to perhaps scale back, but also consider if you could use other materials that are available to cover different components in your lecture. something that demonstrates a similar concept that you're wanting to share, but maybe from a different angle. Okay, we'll move on now. Not quite yet, but a key takeaway is essentially with synchronous or asynchronous, there is no right or wrong. And this comes from the Keep Learning Guidelines too, that synchronous and asynchronous delivery really do each have their own place. So we'll move on now to educational technology. So there is a lot out there. There are lots of tools, lots of resources offered by our institution, but also outside. And so in preparing this next little bit, I'll share with you a framework to consider, as well as some questions here. So to start, really think about educational technology from a backwards design perspective. And what I mean by that is first looking at your course and the learning outcomes, and what are you hoping students, what do you hope students will be able to do or to experience, to achieve by the end of this course? And then what tools are needed to help them get there? Can your students get to the outcomes without the use of any tool, like aside from Learn? A framework I will share with you on the next slide is called the SAMR model. And essentially it asks you to consider whether you're seeking to substitute, augment, modify, or redefine an existing teaching or learning activity. I'll get to that in a little bit. But in terms of tools, I'd suggest considering what tools your students are most comfortable with, but also what tools are you most comfortable with. In preparation for the fall and keeping with the theme of keeping things simple, do you have capacity to learn and explore a new tool? Or have you used something that you feel like this has worked? I received fairly positive feedback. I think I will use that again. What tools are already at your fingertips or supported by UW? Lots out there again, but what's your capacity in terms of finding a tool that works for you? Equity and inclusivity are very, very important considerations when choosing your tool. So internet access, software, what kind of tool are you looking at? Do students have to pay for the tools? Do you have to pay for the tools? Lots to consider there. And the last question I have here is, what types of support will you need for the selected tool? So once you've chosen something or more than one tool, throughout the term, do you feel fairly confident in just kind of running the tool yourself with troubleshooting? If students come to you with questions, are you able to support them in a timely manner? In terms of the support, do you see that you may need to contact myself or perhaps someone from CEL or Learn Help throughout the term? Just really important to consider the time load piece. So the SAMR model here was created by Dr. Ruben Puendedura, and it has what looks like a staircase or a ladder. So with the S is substitution, A augmentation, M modification, and R redefinition. So while it looks like in this model you're striving to get to substitution, really think of this model as a spectrum. And an example of that means that perhaps in some learning activities or your course, substitution might be what you need alone. And you don't have to, for example, like redefine everything you're using technology for. An example of substitution is if you are in class, let's say, you want to have your students engage in a think, pair, share activity. Obviously, right now, you can't do that. But perhaps online, you use breakout rooms, size of 2, for students to do the think, pair, share activity. In class, if you've used sticky notes before, you want students to do something like a gallery walk, you can replace that activity with something like Padlet, where students are using virtual sticky notes and commenting on each other. So that's substitution. Augmentation is when you're incorporating more interactive digital elements that enhance the overall learning experience. And one example I thought of for this would be if you wanted to use Padlet, students are able to like each other's posts or ideas or questions. So using that heart icon that I'm sure many of you have seen. So it's a direct substitute, but there are more unique features that would make the learning experience more compelling for students. And then modification here, it says technology that allows for a significant task-free design. And an example of this would be using chat waterfalls, or you may have heard this activity using another term as well. And that's when students, you ask a question during a lecture, let's say, and students type their answer into the chat, but they don't hit the enter or the return key until you say, okay, now hit the enter return key. And that way it's a little bit of a different approach to student engagement. And it allows students to not be biased towards a certain answer or to be swayed when they see a peer say something in the chat. So it's a redesign in the activity because you're wanting all students to engage, but again, like not be biased towards kind of like the fast thinking, risk taking, like the extroverts in the course that will always immediately have an answer. And I've heard a lot of positive feedback on that as well. And then redefinition really is rethinking teaching and learning possibilities, using technology to do things that maybe weren't possible. And an example of this would be if you wanted to have like a video conference, like a web-based synchronous meeting with your class. Maybe you've invited a guest speaker. They are not in Ontario, they are not in Canada, and you're wanting them to attend. This way of using technology is slightly different because if we were in person, it's likely that you wouldn't be able to have the guest speaker who is not in the country attend. So a couple of quick tips for EdTech again here is to determine the degree of time, resources, and cognitive effort required for your tool. Use a tool that you are most familiar and comfortable with. And in the past year, we've really encouraged instructors to use only one additional tool outside of Learn. So maybe it's Learn and Perusal, which is a social annotating tool. Maybe you have a lot of reflective components in your course and you're wanting to use PebblePad or you already use PebblePad. So maybe it's staying in Learn and using the PebblePad links. Padlet is a really popular one I've seen. Maybe you want to use Learn and PebblePad. Learn and Padlet. And then Google Docs is a very simple tool, collaborating tool, but can be very useful as well if you're wanting to have students collaborate within their groups as well. Very important here is to share your rationale for using the tool with students. If students know why you have specifically chosen this tool, if you can help them see the value of using the tool, then they're more likely to be motivated, first, if they haven't used the tool, to learn how to use it. And that will also set you up for success throughout the term. So I'll take an example here for PebblePad. Like PebblePad is something that students have access to even beyond their time in your course, but also beyond their time at Waterloo. So talking about the benefits of using that would likely be well received by students. And the last point here is reflecting on your use of the tool after a specified period of time. So let's say you're using a tool for the first time, it's not working so well at midterm. By midterm, is there any way that you might shift your approach? Is there another tool, or perhaps do you need the tool at that point? And then end of term, doing kind of a full term reflection, like what worked about it, what did I like, what did it lack, what can I consider for the next course offering, or perhaps another course I might be teaching. And you might choose to use like surveys to get that feedback, or your own kind of introspective reflection as well. So I do want to touch upon video conferencing tools because this is a really popular question. What platform should I use? There's a lot out there. What are the pros and cons? IST recommends one of the three currently. So MS Teams, WebEx, or Bongo. I have Zoom start here because I have heard a lot about Zoom coming, and I'm sure you may have in your conversations heard about Zoom as well. So currently UW has a license for Zoom. And right now they're currently working on migrating existing user accounts. So that process is still in the works. They are planning to make Zoom available for fall. They're testing it right now, and they're hoping to have Zoom integrated into Learn for the fall. So that would mean from Learn, both instructors and students would be able to access Zoom, perhaps through a widget. So maybe what you've seen with WebEx, how it's linked, they're hoping to have that. And I have to thank Trevor Bain as well for his insights, because I'm always kind of asking about Zoom, but right now, not everyone is ready. They're not ready to have everyone set up with Zoom accounts. As I get information, I will definitely share that your way. But for today, I will speak a bit about MS Teams. You can see here, I've just jotted down a couple of the features that are shared across the three platforms. So there's a capacity for the meetings, obviously. There are breakout rooms available for all: chat, recording, screen sharing, live captions, polling. Waiting room is something I'll just note here that does not exist in Bongo. So if you're wanting something where you're doing one-on-one consultations with students, for example, and you don't want all students to just join the space at one time, perhaps maybe considering Teams or WebEx in that instance. They all have different features, capabilities for students to collaborate with each other using the files function. And with MS Teams, there's also, you can request a Teams roster for your course to be created before the start of term. So when I send out that reminder of, okay, now you can request your course to be created in Learn, I'll also add a note. You can also request your MS Teams as well. I will add here a feature with Bongo that some instructors have used is the annotation tool. So where they see a whiteboard or they have a whiteboard, they can add notes to their slide. It can be a really nice visual for students if that's something that you're interested in doing. I will move along to another piece of ed tech that's I get a lot of questions about, and that's in terms of breakout rooms. So you may have used breakout rooms in your course. Throughout the past year, you may be planning to use them. And these are a couple of guidelines for you to consider. And again, I think, so Todd, I have to find the last name, but Todd Zed from the Educational Developers Conference a couple of weeks ago shared this in his session. He's from the University of North Carolina, but I do want to give him credit for these tips. Is if you are planning to assign breakout rooms, assign a clear task with a clear outcome for students. So why are you putting them into breakout rooms? Is it just because you want to mix things up? And that may be so, but like, what are students going to get out of it? I often hear that students and instructors might have a bit of anxiety when they're put into breakout rooms because maybe you're going to be meeting with people you haven't connected with yet. This is a really great way, if you have a clear task with a clear outcome, for them to know what they are getting into, for lack of a better word. You might want to introduce a sponge activity. So as you're setting up breakout rooms, like if you're wanting to do them manually and you don't really want to have students just wait and sit in the background, perhaps thinking of a question to think of in advance of being assigned their breakout room. It could be something maybe not even related to a course. Maybe it's an icebreaker activity you want students to engage in as you're setting it up. Sponge activities could be something you want to try, or perhaps something you already do. Identifying the amount of time for your breakout room, so how long will students be in the rooms? When will you close them, if you will be? And then making groups large enough to get a conversation going. So if you're assigning students to breakout rooms of 2, so for example, if you're wanting to do a think, pair, share, you have a clear purpose, that's fine. But we've heard that students often, they feel more comfortable if there are more voices in the space. So depending on the size of your course, that's something to consider, is using larger rooms as well. You might want to identify a way for students to start in the conversation. So saying something like, when you are in your breakout room, I'd like one person to start sharing like something about this question. It could be an icebreaker question. That way you, as the instructor, you kind of help start the conversation. Students don't go into a room thinking, okay, now what? But like they actually have something to work off of. And the last tip here is identifying a way to report out. So perhaps a student might have an emergency or maybe an appointment during the session, and they're scared, oh, do I have to stay? What if I need to go right now? Just let them know that if something comes up during the breakout room, to either share that with you or not, just so that just to lessen the anxiety a little bit when they're in the breakout room. To wrap this section up, simplest form of technology is best. So simple might mean differently for everybody here, but really, really ahead of the fall, to not feel pressured to use 3, 4, and plus tools as well. We'll move along to another popular topic that has surfaced throughout the past year, which is academic integrity and alternatives to final exams. So in the past year with remote teaching, you may have heard or experienced yourself a rise in academic integrity cases. Maybe you're noticing from your observations, or perhaps your TAs are noticing, or perhaps you're hearing from students themselves that they are cheating, and you know that they're cheating. And what I will speak about in this section is really to put your focus on learning as opposed to avoiding cheating. And what I mean by that is, in terms of academic integrity, think about how it's currently addressed in your course. Is it a brief section in your course outline? Is it a quiz you require students to complete so that they see the quiz itself? So for example, it's like you're using release conditions where students have to check off everything in order to see the quiz. Is it in your assignment description? So if you have something like a writing activity, are you making it obvious at the top? These are my expectations, that you're completing work on your own, that you are citing sources, etc. The second question here, again, it touches on the tone. Is your approach to academic integrity very, not rigid, but is it very punitive? Like, are you sending a message to your students saying, I'm going to be looking out to see if you're cheating or not? We've heard that students, if you're able to build a rapport with them at the start of term, and if you're honest with your expectations, that students really are less likely to cheat. Another question here is considering if your current assessments align with the intended outcomes. So looking at a final exam, why do I have this kind of closed book final exam? Is this something that has existed in my course through several terms? Is it something that is necessary? Again, in that handout, I will share there are tons and tons of resources and webinars that have been delivered recently that you're welcome to look to for further guidance on this subject, because it's a very heavy subject here. But really reassessing your assessment structure to see, can a student complete or achieve the learning outcomes without completing that like closed book exam? And that's kind of that second last question here. Looking at your assessment structure, are your assignments scaffolded? So do you have a lot of high stakes assessments in your course? Is everything worth 25%? Or are there kind of like 10, 15 assessments, 10, 15% assessments designed in your course in a way that aligns with the outcomes, but also in a way that alleviates stress from students. They don't feel so anxious. If they don't feel so anxious, they are then less likely to cheat. And the last question, the last question I have here is taking stock of your resources, logistics, and constraints. So you might have in the fall term, you, the instructor, and perhaps 2 TAs, or perhaps you have 5 TAs, and determining how to use your resources, right? Like if you have all assignments as reflective assignments, your grading might be a little bit heavier, but how can you offer a blend of assessments with students while making sure that your well-being is taken care of throughout the term as well as your TAs as well. Couple of tips here, and these are taken from the Office of Academic Integrity. Engaging with students about why academic integrity is important. So again, multiple ways for you to do this. You can use your outline as an opportunity. You can use video as an opportunity. Just speaking a little bit to that piece will be key to help you and your students avoid those AI cases throughout the term. There are resources available online. I've linked here an academic integrity honor statement that has text for you that you might want to use in your exams or in your assessment descriptions, giving very clear directions about your expectations, whether it's individual assignment, whether it's a group work or other assessment as well. Tons of resources again in terms of how to design your assessments to decrease the opportunity for academic misconduct. So a couple of examples I've listed here are if you are creating a midterm that is an online quiz, you might consider using large question banks. You might want to randomize the series of questions so students see a different order. You can scramble the response options on your multiple choice questions. And again, you can also avoid using the same quizzes term after term. These are all just a couple of strategies to start thinking about. And I'm always happy to chat with you if there's a specific feature you're wondering about, like does Learn have this capability? I can walk with you through that as well. When possible, replace timed exams with other types of assessments. So an open book take-home exam or a report, oral exam, an e-portfolio, a virtual poster. So lots of different types. It's really about, again, you know your course the best, so choosing one that speaks to you and has that alignment piece. So if a student does a report instead of a timed exam, are they still going to achieve what they should achieve by the end of your course? Scaffolding, talked a little bit about that, but providing multiple opportunities to demonstrate their knowledge and understanding. Logistics, we covered that last slide. And really here is going into your course, not assuming that all students will cheat. And again, with the key takeaway for this section is keeping your focus on learning and not on avoiding cheating. So I will pause here because I have one more section to go. Is there anything in the chat or does anyone have a question at this time that they would like to ask? Hi, Ashok.
Hi, thank you for giving us tips for improving our course. I had a couple of questions regarding, maybe it might be a conversation for after the second part, but in the realm of academic integrity and where does sharing content that students don't have permission to share, does that fall under academic integrity? Because I know a lot of instances where students are sharing material on third-party websites, encouraging cheating by posting solutions without permission from, say, the instructor or the TA. So is that fall under academic integrity, and has Learn or the university provided us with tools that prevent the sharing of content without permission of the content owner?
That's a great question, Ashok. Thanks for sharing that. And I will answer that in my capacity, and then I might have one of the teaching fellows also share any insight they have. In terms of preventing, it's very, very challenging, if not impossible, to prevent students from sharing content. This definitely, if they're sharing content and they're not citing that, that definitely falls within the realm of academic integrity, and we have a policy that speaks to that from Waterloo. There are, again, the tips shared, there are ways that you can encourage students not to, or to be very explicit about your expectations. But aside from that, like it's very, very difficult to say you cannot share. I mean, you can say you cannot share, but students might, depending on your course, maybe it's like a formula or a solution. Very easy for them to do that. But it's also setting that tone in your course for students to take ownership of their own learning. Like if they're sharing, like how will this affect their performance in the course down the road? Yeah, so really that the student ownership, the agency piece is really what I would encourage. But yeah, to address that question, there is a policy. And I think Gwen, you would be the perfect person to add any insight here as well. Gwen Penner.
Hi, I just put something in the chat also, but it's also most of the the academic integrity issues are taking place on the site Course Hero. I don't know if that's what you're referring to. You can request from Course Hero that they take the information down, that it's your property, your intellectual property. And the Course Hero is one site that will actually comply. And I'm trying to think who I had a conversation with in the health department, and maybe I see Elena has her hand up, maybe it was her. And they actually, the Course Hero did take the information down, if that's the context that you're referring to. So maybe, Elena, you have your hand up. Maybe you can have another thought there.
Oh yeah, it wasn't me. I haven't ever asked the Course Hero to take it down, so must have been somebody else went. But I was just going to follow up on what Ashok was saying, and it is a real problem, and I understand the frustration. And I feel like there is a lot of things when it comes to academic integrity. I actually, in contrast to what Natalie was saying, don't assume everybody's cheating. I just recently attended a conference where people just did independent study and kind of review some content material that was shared on Reddit among undergraduate students. And actually the assumption that the conclusion that the researchers made was that students assume that we know they're cheating. So cheating became sort of a norm in an online environment. And sort of it becomes something that you presumably have no control over. So, knowing that there is not a lot that you can do outside and that there is multiple ways for this information can be shared. I would agree with Kelly and Gwen to just, and what you said, Natalie, to just be very explicit, and Ian saying the same thing, just explicitly saying to students that this is bad, that you shouldn't do it, and explaining it, appealing to the human side of the human people that are students, and kind of just explaining it to them, I guess, is the best approach that we can take given the situation. Yeah.
Thanks, Elena. And I see Ken has their hand up.
Hi. I'm just looking for some clarity around tools in class size, because the website says that has MS Teams is 300 max, but that looks like that's for full functionality of Teams. Because I was like, my class is like 500, so I was assuming I was going to have to use WebEx, but it seems like maybe I could use Teams if I wasn't planning on breakout rooms, etc. But I'm just looking for security.
That's right, Ken. And I'll answer your question for sure. So with Teams, the capacity is set at 300 if you are using breakout rooms, but the max is 1,000 students. So if you weren't planning to use breakout rooms, and that's just automatically applied. So in your case, if you prefer to use Teams and you're not thinking of using the breakout rooms, then that's fine.
Then,
Does that help?
yeah, that helps. And then do we have any, like, is there any insight on the functionality? Like, I've used both. Usually for WebEx, it's only for thesis students' defense is how I've been using it. And then I've been using Teams for my own lab meetings. Like, do we have any idea which ones work better or cleaner or less problems? Like, do you have insights on what students prefer? Like, I'm just, do we have any of that information now, or are we still kind of finding our way?
Yeah, so I have anecdotal thoughts to share, like in terms of what I've heard. Zara, I think you've had your hand up for a while. Did you want to speak on this point, or was it another? Oh. Or not? Okay.
Just I can add to Ken's question. It really depends, like in my opinion, on how you want to then embed that into your Learn platform and share it. So from my experience, I would say that MS Teams is a lot easier using Stream in order to embed that within your Learn content, rather than sharing like the WebEx link and saving it that way is a little bit more difficult. I mean, it's doable, but it's a lot easier with MS Stream in terms of embedding Learn.
Thanks, Robin. Yeah, and just to build on that too, there isn't, in response to the question, kind of, are we still kind of figuring out what's best? I've heard anecdotally that a lot of students prefer Teams. Sometimes with Bongo Virtual Classroom, for example, I've heard a couple of students and instructors experiencing like internet lag issues more than another platform. On the other hand, I've had instructors not really liking Teams. They like to use their own Zoom accounts if they have it, and perhaps Zoom is what they're comfortable with. They find breakout rooms work nicer using Zoom. So it's definitely a mixed bag, I would say. I'm definitely happy to help you figure out what is the best for your use, but looking at what you're most comfortable with maybe is the best starting point. Because at this point, I mean, like, most students are very tech savvy, and it's just a matter of if you give them the instructions on how to use certain things, and they'll be able to figure it out with guidance. And Asha, yeah.
Yeah, I think most of the people gave feedback that is very helpful. And yes, Course Hero is one of them, but there are multiple sources. But I would just like to add that one of the things that the Learn can do for us instructors is that they can have a system in Learn where when we post notes, it automatically, or not, when we post notes or PDFs on Learn, and if a student downloads it, there is a script that can easily be written where whoever downloads the notes, automatically the downloaded notes get a footer and a header, where the footer says, this material is not to be posted on third-party website, and it does not have permission to be posted. And in the bottom, it registers the student who downloaded it and when they downloaded it. This way, if the students feel that, oh, they should download this, and they feel that they can post it, when they download it, the boilerplate is already there, and the student is reminded that, okay, look, I shouldn't be posting it. So I've heard the comments that we should let students know, and it is openly and clearly mentioned, and there are students who always violate this knowingly. So I just want that pointed out, that it's not just that the instructors aren't being clear. Even when things are being clear, there are students who are going to be violating. And I don't think that all instructors assume that all students are cheating, but it's the few that are cheating that creates a huge mess for instructors. And when other students see it, they come and complain to us that how are you making this fair when clearly someone is cheating and you're not doing anything about it, when that's not the case, right? So I think that needs to be clarified, that all instructors are not assuming that everyone is cheating.
Thanks for that, no, Ashok. And I see here Zara has asked, like, are you referring to all documents or just PDFs? Zara posts PowerPoint slides.
Yeah, I think any document should be able to convert it into PDF and then add the boilerplate to it. I think they used to do that when we used to have in-class exams, and we used to post on a website where we had to post our exams, and then I think it was the registrar's group that added a boilerplate about when the course is and the time is, so they can clearly do that. I have told Learn last year to add that feature so that instructors can turn it off and on for their course content, but I never got a response. So maybe you can speak to the Learn Tech people, and hopefully they can add a script. This way, we are doing our part to make it clear more than once or more than twice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it's possible that that has to come from D2L. I just put that in the chat, and I will put that on their community site as a request. So hopefully other people will also want that feature.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gwen.
Sure.
What I will do now, I'm just going to pause on the Q&A. We'll definitely have time to return to it. I have a little bit to talk about in terms of student engagement in your course. Then we'll move on to teaching fellows sharing a little bit about what they've done. And then again, please do jot your questions as they come up. And thank you so much to everyone for participating in the chat and for sharing some resources as well. So student engagements, couple questions to consider here. In the remote teaching world, how do we make sure we are motivating students? At this point, it's been a long time that we've been in this remote teaching, but how do we sustain that motivation for students and also for yourself as well? So the first question here talks about different levels of interactions you might have in your course. So student with students, so with their peers, perhaps engaging in a discussion board, student with their instructors, so having a consultation opportunity throughout the term with you, student with the content, what are they reading, what are they hearing, what are they doing, and students and themselves. So are there opportunities where you ask students to check in with their own learning, where they're reflecting on a topic of focus? Looking at your course organization and how you've structured that. So in your course, are you guiding students to what they need in a logical manner? Or do they enter your course and they're kind of lost to begin with? Are you being strategic about where you place certain modules or where you place discussion assessments? And then have you considered perhaps how to motivate students? Was this something that has really crossed your mind before? Was there something that you tried out last time you've taught, or that you're hoping to try for the fall? How are you encouraging students to become invested in their learning? And what does student engagement look like, or what does it mean for you? How do you measure that? Does student engagement mean that they are completing all of their assignments, submitting them on time or ahead of time? Is student engagement to you if they are attending your synchronous session, you know their name, kind of like what does that mean to you? And then how would you describe your level, the level of community that you fostered in your course and your presence? So do students know a little bit about you? Do you have, again, videos? Do you have a bio section? Do you have an area that says, this is my communication plan throughout the term? This is how you can reach me. Are those areas addressed in your course? Do students know where to go? Just quickly here, a little bit, it's a diagram created by Garrison, Anderson, and Archer. It's a theoretical model. It looks at online courses, and it's what they call the community of inquiry. Many educators and researchers across the online education world have adopted this model. And essentially, the model says that there are 3 essential types of presence that form the building blocks of a course community. So there is teaching presence, so that's you as the instructor. There is cognitive presence, so every class, every course has a small community of people that are brought together to explore a subject. And then there is the social presence of that, and that is peers and the instructor, their TAs, they're supporting one another throughout this whole, in the center, as you see there, throughout this whole educational experience. And there are overlaps within the three sections as well. So there's selecting content, setting the climate, and supporting discourse. So a couple of quick tips for you here in terms of student engagement is the theme of communicating your expectations. So what do you expect from your students throughout the term? How are you expecting them to engage, and outlining the value of them? So if you do have discussion posts, or if you do have another tool you're using, another platform, what do you expect students to do? Like if you're using Perusal for the collaborative note-taking piece in your course, how many times do they need to post something? Getting to know your students, encouraging them to get to know one another will help you to build a strong learning community. And the fourth point here connects with the tools in your course. So if students are not feeling stressed about the tools they have to use in the course, likely to be more engaged, then they can focus on what they need to learn, as opposed to figuring out how do I get past this barrier to get what I need to learn, get what I need to know. Social presence, I talked about, checking in on your students' well-being as appropriate. So keeping in mind that not all students will be comfortable sharing what's going on in their lives with you, and they don't need to. But if you have opportunities in your course to check in and to remind them of the resources available to them on campus, I say, but the UW resources, that is always a good thing to do. And then asking for midterm feedback on the course. So I've seen a ton of instructors, they've used surveys, kind of what's working, what's not working, what suggestions do you have, and really taking the time to listen to that feedback and letting students know how you're going to implement the feedback, as opposed to just let me know how things are going, and the course really will run its course out the term. But if you're choosing to do that midterm kind of check-in, making sure you're implementing. And then finally, using synchronous or asynchronous strategies for building engagement. So we talked a little bit about how to engage students in a synchronous session. I know Robin will be sharing a little bit more about how she does that. But in both forms of delivery, there are ways to engage your students. Key takeaway is just that a sense of community and social presence, it really does help students stay engaged in their learning. Learning then becomes, again, more real. They know that there are other humans on the other side of the screen. And this is something to keep in mind even past the remote teaching that we're all experiencing. So we'll move along now to a couple of examples from Zara. Zara will go first about things that have worked in their courses.
Okay, I'm just going to keep it really short, but one of the things that we saw in the surveys and the feedback was this forever struggle about asynchronous versus synchronous versus some kind of mix of those things. And so the teaching fellows just wanted to show snapshots from our courses of all three approaches. So I'm going to talk about my primarily asynchronous coursework. So there are a couple of things that I do in my courses to try and connect with my students, as I say, in real-ish time. And this came out of the spring 2020 and fall 2020 surveys, my initial surveys that I got back from students who are willing to participate in start of term surveys about their life and situation and journeys for the term. I found that a lot of our students, way more than I expected, didn't have access to a reliable wireless signal. They lived in rural areas. They shared the internet with 5 other people who were working or doing school. And so it took them, 2 or 3 hours to download big files and that kind of thing. And so that's what shaped my primarily asynchronous journey. I do in some courses have optional live lectures, but I find that they're not very well attended. So I largely have stuck with this approach for the last year and a bit. So my modules, as Natalie said, are really similar. So every week they follow a similar structure. And one thing that I did want to say about this that I didn't write down is that if you have a great structure, or at one point someone from CEL or somebody helped you build a good format, you can request that that CTE that Learn Help copies those components over to future courses. So if you find a structure that really works, instead of having to rebuild it all the time, you can pull those things in. So that's what I have done, and it's been really useful. I have really basic understanding of HTML, but that's enough to sort of keep that same look and be able to edit those things. So anyway, every week starts with a video that's under 5 minutes, just saying hello, commenting on the weather, whatever, sort of trying to situate ourselves into being together at the start of the week. My lectures, my modules go up 1 module a week, and they go up on Sunday, the Sunday before the week. Sooner if I get them done sooner, but there have been a lot of new preps, so they're not always able to be done early. So it always starts with a video, and that's where I'll also have any kind of course announcements, really similar to the start of a regular lecture. And then the content is a mixture of written content right in one module page with call out boxes to get them to reflect on something, read something, watch something. And then narrated PowerPoints that have audio cues and occasional video cues. Occasional video cues to avoid them being too large. And that has been a format that most students have said works well for them. I think it's, the last time that I pleased everyone in a class was never. So obviously there are some people who would rather have a live lecture every week. It's just not going to work out for those people. But I have gotten good feedback about the narrated PowerPoints in terms of accessibility and being relatively engaging in the remote world. So separate from the modules, which are asynchronous, I am very active on team chats, and my course has, or all of my courses have a team. I create a team for them, and they have group channels that are maybe connected to work or maybe just connected to having a supportive group of classmates that they can share resources, bounce ideas off of. And I'm always on Teams during the business day when I'm available to chat. So they'll chat with me within their group. We'll have a video meeting, and I've made myself available for those on an as needed basis. I found for my students that when I set a particular time, I'm always available Wednesday from 12 to 3, that people are consistently just asking to meet at another time. So I just made it on an as needed basis, and I'm repeatedly reminding students that I'm here, I'm available. If I see groups meeting, because you get the little video icon beside their group name, I'll pop into the meeting and just say, hi, anything going on, any questions or concerns? And so that's been the way that I've delivered asynchronous content, but then tried to make connections with them. Asynchronous content, but then tried to make connections with them in a real-time, more synchronous way. And that is my profile. Natalie, I don't know if you want to go through all 3 of ours, or if anyone has questions or comments now on this approach.
I think we're good for time. If anyone has a question maybe for you, Zara, right now they'd like to ask, I think that would be a good time, and then we'll move on to the next. Yeah. Does anyone have any questions? I know that Luke said great work. So
thanks, Luke. My RLS colleague, hello. And with anything, if anyone wants to see the layout of a module or whatever, I'm happy to, send pictures or send more information. How many students interact? 200, around 80. The largest course I've had since the pandemic was, I think, 130 registered in winter for a different course. Action feature is what the registrar has used for. Oh, that's about our other conversation. Yeah. Seems pretty straightforward. No other questions? I'll hand it off, and I'm happy to chat more or to share screen caps or information about any of this process for anyone who is interested. But yeah, just a little plug for start of term, optional start of term surveys. They've been really, really informative for me, and every term is a little bit different. People have different things going on as their lives evolve through the pandemic as well. So I found that really useful for thinking about how to structure my modules or my courses. Thanks, Natalie.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Sarah. And now we have Robin.
Perfect. Hello, everybody. I'll keep it really short. I agree with Sarah. I always set up a start of term. Oh, I didn't set my do not disturb, so you're going to hear dinging. I apologize. But I do put a survey on at the start of term. I've done both asynchronous and synchronous, and just for the material that I tend to teach, as well as the style that works for me, synchronous works much better. So when I had to do asynchronous, I did it. But I would say that the feedback for my style of courses has been really positive towards synchronous since we've been able to. So the students tend to find more accountability in terms of having a set time each week to come to a live lecture. It's been a little bit easier for me to interact with the students while I'm giving the lecture so that I can get feedback as I go through. So I also do, at the start of the week, I give a schedule for the students just about when the synchronous sessions are going to be, practice questions or case studies that we're going to be going through throughout the week, and any assignment or quiz dates if that's applicable. So I do give them a schedule at the start of the week. And then the synchronous sessions, I do lots of interaction. So it's lecture-based, but they can participate in the chat while I'm teaching and ask questions. I do breakout rooms, rapid-fire questions where I ask something and they all push enter at the same time. I've used Mentimeter for open-ended questions or quizzes. There's lots of different styles that you can use Mentimeter for. And then my lectures tend to be longer, my synchronous sessions, just because of some of the courses that I teach. And so at the 1 hour break, I always do an exercise break. And so the top, I don't have the laser pointer, but the top screen there is actually just, I encourage students to open up their cameras, and we do like a 3-minute HIIT workout during my lectures. So a lot of them will open up their screen and we do a little exercise break. And in that, I've used it as an opportunity. A lot of some of the courses I teach have to do with, quality of movement as well. So it's an opportunity for me to give them tips about exercises and quality and modifications, how to make something easier or harder. So it's kind of building into the course design just to improve their use of different exercises. And then I was, at the start of this pandemic, kind of moving my content into just a closed book, midterms and exams, but there was lots of cheating, and which we know. And so I've really moved into a open book style of evaluation where it's more encouraging critical thinking and application questions. And so that's been really good in terms of they have to know the material, be comfortable with it, and I've changed the style of questions that they have to apply it, which is what they would have to do in the real world anyways. And then I try to have an office hours coffee chat to casually connect with students as well. So I've tried to, change kind of the how high the stakes are in the course. And so sometimes, like quizzes each week are lower stakes, but just to keep continual participation throughout the term and watching video content and all of that. But I'm happy to chat with anyone that has, a style to move into, like critically thinking application-based questions. I will say that there was one comment I was going to add about that, and it's just slipped my mind. But if there's any questions, ask me, and if it comes to me, I will let you know. And then, of course, I teach neuroscience courses as well as exercise prescription and movement style courses. And I've been able to move videos and pictures into the virtual space to show everybody this in a virtual environment. I've taken some events that we typically do in person, and I've pivoted them into the virtual space as well. So it's been pretty successful, and the feedback has been pretty positive from students. But let me know.
Thanks so much, Robin. Does anyone have any questions for Robin right now before we move on to Elena? Yes, Kat.
Hi, Robin. Thanks.
Hi.
Just some of the things with the synchronous versus the asynchronous was the connectivity issues. Like, what was your experience, like numbers wise, and even more so would be like percentage would be great, so you could kind of scale it up to bigger classes.
Yeah. So I've had quite large classes, and the connectivity hasn't really been an issue, but it's always recorded and they can go back to it. But in terms of participation, I've had in my lectures, I've had greater than 50% consistently. So I would say anywhere from 50 to 75, 80% of the class. Some students will always email and say that they're working. A lot of students have started working more in this remote teaching space, and so they just catch up with the lectures afterwards. When I did asynchronous, I will say from a kin and health studies perspective, it is difficult for a lot of our courses to keep the clips to under 15 minutes, like 5 to 10 minutes. And so in the asynchronous, students were okay with 20 to 25 minutes because some of the content within our department, it's hard to break it up. And so 20 to 25 minute videos were okay. Students were not troubled by that at all. But yeah, as long as it was recorded, students had no one's complained about connectivity issues.
And then what like when you do a recording, say of this Teams, like what size files is this thing kicking out?
It doesn't save to your computer. It goes, and that's the advantage of Teams, is it goes right into Stream. When you hit record, it goes right into Microsoft Stream. So it doesn't matter the file size. So I can check what the file size is. Like some of my lectures, the max would be about 2 hours that I've recorded, and it was no issue. Right away, it's on Stream, and then I just embed it to learn.
And that works really well. Okay.
Yeah, no issues at all.
Because I guess the big thing I find is, feedback during lecture is critical to explaining biochemical concepts, and trying to anticipate challenges for an asynchronous lecture is just really challenging. I'd spend all my time trying to do that, which would lead to larger file sizes.
Yeah, and that's what I found challenging, because in the fall I was teaching like a 4th year neuroscience course, and same thing, like explaining some of the concepts was really difficult. So in that environment, I had to do asynchronous lectures, but then I had the synchronous times each week to kind of go over case examples, questions, all of that, and explain concepts further. But it would have been easier in a live lecture to kind of go through that. And so in that way, the synchronous style is nice. You have a whiteboard feature that you can go through on Microsoft Teams as well and go through concepts, draw them out. And students tend to appreciate that.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Any other questions, or I'll pass it off to Elena.
I think Ashok has a question, and then before Ashok, maybe Melanie also asked if you're using participation for grading. Are you using sync participation for grading?
No. So you can't use participation in the synchronous, like regardless in the remote learning environment, you can't use participation in terms of attending the synchronous session for grading, but you can use participation in terms of viewing the lecture material, doing a quiz, things like that, as long as it's accessible both synchronously or asynchronously. It just has to be accessible to both. But no, I don't use any participation during synchronous session as a grade, unless it was like a KIN 470 seminar course, and then I implemented that in a different way. But yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to Ken's question, because you were using MS Teams and I was using WebEx, and I'm going to switch to MS Teams for the reason you specified, that the download files are already synced into Learn. So I would definitely recommend that as well, because I did WebEx where a 90-minute lecture turned out to be around 80 megabytes. So I had to download it and upload it every time for every lecture I did. And I'm going to go with the suggestions made earlier for the coming semesters where, as people have said, I'll use MS Teams, and it's already integrated and uses cloud, I believe. So it's good.
Yeah, so it goes right into Microsoft Stream, and then you have to physically embed it. It's just you're embedding the link, but it's super easy. So, and I'm happy to show anybody that if you have questions.
Thank you again.
No problem.
Awesome. Thanks, Robin. And I see Anton also posted a link in the chat regarding uploading the recordings to Teams. So I will leave it to Elena now, and I will change the slide.
Thank you, Natalie. So I just wanted to share my experiences. I've taught 6 courses since the last 4, the fall of last year, and different course sizes, so anywhere between 17 and 270 students. So clearly the approach was a little bit different. But what I found was working really well for me is sort of the mix between synchronous and asynchronous. And depending on how much engagement I want to have in class, so for the smaller seminar classes, there would be more engagement and more synchronous activities, whereas for the larger classroom, there may be more asynchronous activities. So essentially, the way that I structure is that I still had sort of the asynchronous model in mind, where I had a very specific schedule for every class listed right away. And I know it's hard to see, but here you see a screen cast from my one of my courses where I sort of provided students with a schedule about what each week will entail. And I offered narrated PowerPoint slides and other ready-to-go content, so relevant videos that I found on the web as a preparation to the meetings. Now, the meetings were scheduled weekly, and those were meetings where we would usually do something on top of what we have done in sort of asynchronous material. So people would read the assigned readings, and they would go through narrated PowerPoint slides, and they would maybe watch additional video. And then the meetings were offered divided into 2 parts. So one part would be where I just address any questions people may have with respect to readings or lectures or whatever was posted. And the other one where we had some more of an application. So using different type of case studies, or in sociology reading class, I had people coming as guest lecturers to provide some insights with respect to the topic that we covered. So those were recorded. They weren't mandatory to attend, but they were recorded in a place for students to later browse through and look at and kind of experience it in a little bit more interactive way. I have to say that the attendance at those meetings wasn't great. So depending again on the type of the class that I had, if it would be a graduate seminar class, then of course most people would attend. But in the let's say classroom of 265 students that I had, only maybe 20 or 30 would attend those live lectures, but they were available for people. And I use WebEx. So as Ian pointed out, it automatically kind of was available to students because I was embedded in the WebEx widget on Learn. So that is what we've done this week, addressed any questions that were really repeatedly asked, and then just given a little bit of heads up about what's happening the next week, including some information, the upcoming due dates and deadlines and things that students need to expect in the upcoming week. So those were recorded each Friday, so that there's some sort of continuation and structure provided between the asynchronous and synchronous component of the course. And I found that for the smaller classes, the grad classes, we did have team channel, and it was really helpful because we could share some information with respect to new readings, so things that were fine. But I would be hesitant to incorporate something like this on an ongoing basis for the larger class, because I did find that there was quite a lot of frequently asked questions on the forums that I posted on Learn. So for my other classes, the big classes, so I wouldn't probably risk doing the Teams ongoing communication for a very large class. I feel that may be a little bit overwhelming for both myself and students. And I'll just mention that one thing that students really, really appreciated that I've done in every one of my courses is having a small checklist at the end of each page that I developed for every week, so that the checklist students could just open and see what are the things that they were supposed to do each week. And if there was little quizzes or assignments or participation or engagement activities, they could just go over and just make sure that everything was done. So I know that a lot of students commented that that was really helpful too. So this is pretty much it. I don't know if anybody has any questions. I can pass it on to you, Natalie, or address any questions people may have.
Thanks, Elena. Does anyone have any questions right now for Elena's approach? Yes, Ian, go ahead.
See if I can get things to click on here. So I'm finding students quite enjoy the synchronous sessions, despite all the, in fact, an editorial comment I'd make is I sense we're often sort of almost trying to talk people out of doing synchronous. It's always, you know, try everything else first, and if you have to, do some synchronous sessions, but try not to do them. My students are reacting and saying that that's the best part of the course, that they wish that more of us were taking some time to connect with them. And I appreciate the challenges, but I think it's something for us to bear in mind that as much as we're trying to accommodate the student who isn't able to accommodate, connect with us synchronously, there seems to be a large bastion of students who feel like we've left them behind because we're not connecting with them. So my first comment is how much success I've had with students warmly saying how much they enjoy the synchronous part. But here's where I'm searching for help from all of you who have tried something synchronous. And I don't know if it's just a generational thing. Has anybody got a secret to figure out how to get them to turn their cameras on? Because what I'm finding is they really, really want to be there. If I say we're not going to have a synchronous session, I actually get complaints. But then when I have a synchronous session, it's like I'm pretty frank with them both. It's like talking to a classroom, everybody's got a paper bag over their head. They're engaged, they're talking, and maybe like us today, all of our cameras are off. So I'm looking for hints and ideas from anybody about how to get them to turn their cameras on.
If I can just jump in, and I agree with you, and I think it depends on the content. I know that students that did attend my sessions really loved it. I think the key here is not making them mandatory for large classes, right? Because you can't really assume that everybody will be available during the time that the lecture is posted, especially during last term where we, from the get-go, weren't given an option to give them to put it on the schedule, right? So you can't expect people to be there if they do have previous engagement or whatnot. But for the grad classes and smaller seminars, I found that everybody really, really appreciated an opportunity to be there in person. So I think that I did hear a lot of positive comments. With respect to the cameras, this is where I found it a little bit, for me personally, kind of painful, especially when you have the sessions and you know people are there and there's no cameras on. What I've done in my experience, I just ask students to, if they feel comfortable to have their cameras on. And again, in most of the smaller classes, people did, but I'm also mindful of the fact that sometimes people may have communication issues, and I am myself being semi-rural area constantly experience issues with my camera, so I get that. But there is also some consideration that students were sharing in, I know some of the surveys that are circulating around, that they may not feel comfortable or having their camera because they may have some sort of mayhem behind them, right? And they don't know how to blur the screen, or there's certain, I don't know, they in their pajamas, or there's other people around that they don't want to be exposed to show what's happening behind them. So I just kind of offer it as an option, saying that I would appreciate that, but I don't mandate that, because I feel that that would be really kind of challenging for students to keep up. And I
don't mandate it. I don't mandate it either, and I certainly think those are all legitimate reasons why all of us might sometimes have our camera off. I will say the one thing I have found that works is fascinating is, if I'm going to do a synchronous session, I always have breakouts. There's always some activity. It's not a talking head time. It's a time for them to meet. I think that's what they hunger for. And I find as soon as I put them in a breakout room, everybody turns the cameras on. So I've begun to scheme here. I'll actually drop everybody into breakout rooms, even though I could have done it as a big group. And then I start to go into the breakout rooms myself and move between them. So that's the one secret I found. But anyway, Robin, if you've got an idea, I'm happy to take ideas from anybody as to how to get them comfortable, other than the legitimate reasons Alina's rightfully saying, why they may not want to turn their camera on. But, you know, when it's one camera out of 45 students, I think there's more going on than background. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just add, Ian, that so I do indicate to them that I will let them know when I'm starting the recording. So one thing I do is I encourage people to open up their cameras and say hello before the recording starts, because some of them just don't want to be on the recording, which, so that's one thing that I do. At the start of term, I also talk about professionalism and professionalism within the virtual space, and how even like clinically, for example, we've moved into this virtual space and I need to be visible to my clients if I meet with them over a computer or, you know, have a meeting. And so we want to get comfortable in this space as well. And I mean, I certainly had to kind of cross a threshold of being the only talking head on a screen to no students showing up. And so there's a comfort level for them. And so the same thing I talk about at the start of term, I teach them about blurring their background or setting their environment, stuff like that. The warning of recording, the breakout rooms, a lot of them will open up their cameras, and I do the same thing. I cycle through the rooms to see that. I encourage them, if they're meeting with me, to show their face. And so that, because in person we would be meeting and seeing each other. So I just talk about how we want to pretend we're in person and connect with each other. But yeah, I mean, some are not comfortable. I did have a in-person event that I pivoted into the virtual space. And one thing that I did was I held a lot of practice sessions and said that they had to have, like in that, it had to be mandated that their camera was on and their microphone was on, because they were going to be meeting with a community member. So they had to then connect with their classmates in practice sessions, cameras on, mics on, and interview each other. And the feedback from that was just so great. They got to know each other. And then the feedback from the event, the same. Like they got to meet with a community member, and they all said that they had to get comfortable, like showing themselves on camera, and they felt a lot better about it afterwards. So just little things, but you're never going to get them all showing up on camera.
It's a really good point you make, Robin, about telling them when the recording starts. And I do that myself. And I also explicitly tell them when we're going to stop recording.
Yeah.
And then I always stay on a bit after that. And I'm fascinated. The best discussions, the most active discussions that are happening in my class are happening in that time when I now say, hey, we're no longer online. Everybody's in there. And maybe because that's like the classroom, right? It's the moment. The people who were there know about it. But then all the people who didn't come, of course, they missed out on what that discussion was.
Well, the coffee chats that I hold, like just the informal coffee chats where we can talk about anything. If they have course questions, great, whatever. If it's just talking about the weather or, you know, what they're doing on the weekend, but just that connection, their cameras are all on during those. So I think there is an element to like the recorded sessions that they kind of steer away from. Yeah.
So how many of us do coffee houses? I do a coffee house as well. Is that a common thing across many of us? Thumbs up, anybody? I actually have a rule for the coffee house too. It's often things that have nothing to do directly with the course. It's something to do about what we're doing, but it's not about this week's assignment. So.
In an informal coffee chat was the reason I went and picked up my new dog.
Exactly.
Last September, my students encouraged me to get my dog. So, yeah, you know, life-changing, these coffee chats.
Thanks so much, Ian, for your question. And thanks, Robin, for sharing as well. So I know that we have just a couple of minutes left, and really just wanting to pose a couple of questions here for you to consider. Anything in terms of the last 3 minutes that you wanted to share that has worked for you? What are you hoping to experience in the fall? Any key insights, remaining questions, next steps? I understand we don't have too much time, but is there anything anyone would like to share that we haven't covered?
We were trying to encourage comfort on camera, and I realized my camera's off, so I turned it on.
Thank you, Robin. That's okay. Robin taught me a really neat trick earlier this morning about how to see the presenter notes and Teams and this. And so really the key, like we're all learning as we go, I think. And again, just to reiterate, we understand everyone's fall term will look different. So just take stock of your own well-being, do what you need to do. I will be sharing where to access this recording, as well as I'll attach the handout I keep referring to later this week. So that's available for you. And feel free, if you want to share that with anyone else, feel free to do so. Is there anything else? Anything else from any of the teaching fellows that you wanted to add that I may have missed?
Just a big thank you to Natalie, who pulled this whole presentation together and consolidated key comments from the surveys from instructors and students and pulled this together today. The teaching fellows really just parachuted in at the last minute. So all credit to Natalie. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Sarah. I wouldn't say all credit. It's a team effort, and I really appreciate your willingness and your insight today, because you're in the course with your students. I know Ken and Melanie had their hand up too.
Hi, it's Ken. I'll go, I guess. Just wondering, like the Learn course creation is set at 7 weeks. Is there any kind of a discussion about trying to get that a little bit longer, or bigger, open earlier, given the amount of things you want to try and test out? Like, I know you can set up dummy accounts and transfer them later, but it just seems that there's no reason we couldn't get in a course in there earlier. I I don't know what pressure we can put on to try to get even a couple of weeks earlier would be nice. So it's just one thing I thought about, because I just tried now and it's not yet 7 weeks yet, right? So
yeah, I would love that too. Is that a Gwen? Can Gwen answer that question? Is Gwen still here? Oh no, Gwen left.
I don't know, but well, I can follow up with Gwen. I can follow up with my team and the other liaisons as well, to see if this is a question that is raised. And I'm certainly getting a lot of those questions, so it's out of my decision making, obviously, but I can follow up and see. A lot of instructors do make use of like the development course site, which can be created and then transferring everything into the fall term, into the term version. So if I hear anything, I'll do a bit of asking around. I will get back to you, Ken, but also everybody else. Hope that helps. Ken, Melanie, you had a question as well.
Yeah, I just want to say something now. I just got a new microphone and I wanted to test out how that sounds. But what I'm really wondering, sort of with the future vision, I think that model that Elena presented is maybe something that might stick around post-COVID, where the pure transfer of information is done in an asynchronous way, and then the meetings have a very different focus. And yeah, it's kind of interesting to dabble around with that now, to see what will stick really.
Absolutely. Thanks, Melanie. And sorry, Robin, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, yeah, Melanie, like and it's funny because even when you teach synchronously, for example, or asynchronously, sometimes concepts come up that you want to make short videos for that reiterate points. And so some people use that asynchronous content to go through all those videos prior and then have an in-person session. Some people will post asynchronous content throughout the term as you go forward to help them with certain concepts, or a mix of both. It's just kind of finding your style and seeing what works best for you, for sure.
So if you can just jump on that, just a couple of additional thoughts here. So first of all, I agree with Robin, you need to find your groove, right? It's a challenge for us as instructors as well, and for students. And I feel like students intuitively feel this kind of, lack of authenticity. So whatever works for you usually will work for them better, as long as it kind of syncs with what they need and kind of general good pedagogy. But one thing to kind of think about, and this is something that I've struggled with, is how to divide the content so that there is no overwhelmingly large amount of content, right? So for instance, if I have my asynchronous pre-recorded lectures, I won't expect expect them to know the material we cover synchronously on the exam, because that means an added 2 hours or so of meeting, even though my meeting's usually an hour, but just watching them and taking notes and all of that adds on to already pre-recorded material. So I offer those sessions depending on the class. Sometimes I offer them as a required material, but in this case, my asynchronous content was much shorter. Or if this is not required, then my asynchronous content may be 3 or 4 hours preparation or something like this, but this one is not mandatory or required. People can look through it and learn more about it, but there is no expectation on my part that they will know whatever was covered in those lectures. I just found it's important to keep track of as well, like how much we expect our students to do, because they can't do it all. It's too hard. And even for us sitting in front of the screen, it's challenging, it's tiring, right? So just something I wanted to add. Thanks, Melanie.
Thanks everyone for sharing all of your questions and ideas. A lot of great ideas in the chat as well today. And yeah, this session is over, but your preparation is not, I'm sure. So please don't hesitate to reach out to me or anyone, any of the teaching fellows or a colleague. Always happy to connect, set up a meeting. In the handout, there will also be a communications chart to let you know kind of if you have a question in this area, who is the best person to connect with first. So that will be there for you. Thank you, everyone. And I hope everyone has a great rest of the summer and a great rest of the day. Take care.
Thanks, Natalie. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Natalie.